Welcome. We are here to remember Glendon Williams and to honor his life. Bring yourself fully present in this moment. It will never be repeated in the history of the world. This gathering of people. Throughout time immemorial, we humans, when one among us leaves this plane, we have felt the need to come together and remember, to celebrate, to grieve, to share stories and laughter. So welcome to this sacred place, to remember Glen. We are each here because he has touched us. This I can't not laugh. This remarkable human being who has touched each of our lives in unique ways. That's what we're. So breathe in the green mountain air that Glen loves so much. Feel yourself held on Mother Earth, Glen the gardener, the soil of Springfield where he was born that he loved so much. Drink in the beauty of the sun, Glen the gardener, a sun worshiper of sorts, a plant lover. Drink in the beauty of the sun. And feel the miracle of the water running by us, the river right down to the Connecticut that marks this spot, of Springfield, Vermont, where Glen was born. Bring yourself into this sacred moment. To remember, to grieve, to laugh, to tell stories about the remarkable life of Glendon J. Williams. So a few highlights from his life. He was born right here, 77 years ago on June 3rd, 1944. His parents, Wendell and Alberta, welcomed him, the youngest of three. He went to the Springfield schools and ventured out to Pennsylvania, where he pursued his passion of art education. He earned a bachelor's degree from Kurztown University, and from there went on to University of Mass and Dartmouth, and grew and grew and grew. And when you have a chance to walk down the hall and see some of his artwork, if you haven't seen it yet, the culmination of many, many years of his development of himself as an artist, as a teacher, as a person. And Glen is a lover of people, a lover of experiences, a lover of adventure. And of course, what did he do? He joined the Peace Corps. And from 67 to 69, he was in South America, Venezuela, and he traveled Haiti, Jamaica. And he touched many, many, many lives as a teacher. He loved his students, and the time that I knew him, he would tell stories about students from long ago and about his passion for teaching. So he taught in Auburn, Mass, and then he retired in '99. He came back here, and he was an amazing artist. Ceramics, drawing, all kinds. Porcelain sculptures. He was multi-talented, multi-dimensional in his work with art. But art wasn't all. Glen had a wide view of life. Gardening was one of his passions, and he loved his animals. He had a pet bird, Molly, and he loved his Shelties, Shelley and Dylan. He became a master gardener It was after 9/11 that Glen found his way here to this meeting house. There was a gathering here in recognition of 9/11, and Glen came through the door to connect with other people, to have support through that crisis, and he never left. He found a home here. He found a spiritual home in that time of crisis. And he spread his love wherever he went. He volunteered at the soup kitchen. He was involved in many, many ways here. When I first came on as the minister 8 years ago, he was on the board. He was one of the very first people I met. He interviewed me, and I felt a real connection and admiration for him at that time. He devoted a lot of love here. He preached sermons here. He served on I don't know how many committees. And he was a fixture in our spring festival, our May festival, as a gardener. So his house on Dewey Street was kind of a magnet in a way for people who were interested in gardening. He created that beautiful stone sculpture along with Andy. And he was a master gardener, an amateur botanist. He loved to explore and experiment. He hybridized plants, and he fell in love with hostas. And thank you so much, Andy. These beautiful flowers and the array of even hosta leaves without even the flowers themselves. He had more than 2,000 varieties of hostas, one of the largest in New England. He was a member of the American Hosta Association, and he spread his enthusiasm for hostas to Andy, his nephew. So, and he took part in the hybridization contest of hostas. And many of you knew him through his writing. Even after the virus situation, when Glen couldn't come out, and even before that, when he was less mobile, that his place was kind of where Melissa was. That was his spot. And when he was here in the sanctuary, that was where he kind of parked himself and come up with funny comments and witty comments from the back there. But when he could no longer get out, we could always tune into him through his articles in the newspaper. And there's so many times where reading his adventures and his humor and his quirky way of seeing the world, it was wonderful to be able to stay connected with him through the Springfield Reporter and his regular column. So as I mentioned, he had two older brothers, Gene and Galen, both of whom have already passed. He is survived by his sister-in-law, Mary Williams, who's in Saxon's River, and 6 nieces and nephews, Karen, Diane, Howard, Andy, Darsan, who's in Texas, and Terrence in Amherst, and he has multiple grandnieces and grandnephews. And so many friends, so many lives that have been touched by him. So those are a few highlights of his life. So one of the best ways that we can honor him is to share our memories, our stories, the humor, the challenging moments. So Andy is going to start us off with sharing, Andy, who is Glen's nephew, sharing some stories.
Thank God it's a small crowd, I might get nervous. So I wrote some random thoughts, couple stories. Glen was big into his words, and oftentimes he would like to throw strange words at you and see how you react. So I'm going to throw some words at you, describe Glen. And my first words for him are artist, writer, thinker, educator, a generous man, a humanitarian, good citizen, and a good human being. I've got a few other words. Charismatic, humorous, mischievous, impish, arrogant, calculating, stubborn, and generally a sarcastic bastard. But I really like to think of my uncle as a vast person, V-A-S-T, which means mix. Because he really, that's the way I think of it. There was a lot to him. He was well-traveled, lived in other countries, other cultures, with other languages. He had a deep insight into the human condition, into human society, and humanity in general. He was a great educator through his time in the Peace Corps and continued his many years in the Auburn school system in Massachusetts. He often shared stories of his successes and failures with his students with me because he really cared about his students. I think that was his base nature. He really cared about people. To say that he was intelligent is kind of an understatement. Guy knew his history, his authors, philosophers, artists, movie directors, actors, politics, political figures. He had a sponge for a brain that continually needed input. And I consider him kind of a hyper intellectual. He was very dedicated to science and the scientific process. When it came to pottery, for example, and pottery was one of the vehicles used for his artistic expression. He knew the science of the clay medium. He understood the chemistry, the firing, glazes, the problems of impurities, difficulties that the sculpture geometry would create, firing these things and taking them out of the kiln in one piece. He told me a story, probably shared a story with many people, about this big piece that he created. And it was so big and cumbersome and heavy, you couldn't figure out how to get in and out of the kiln. You know, you got to get it in the kiln, you got to fire it, and then you got to take it out. And thought, and the light bulb went off and said, what he did was he built up a huge layer of sand in the bottom of the kiln. And it acted like a bed of marbles. And you could push the piece in, fire it, and then pull the piece out. And it came out perfect. My relationship with my uncle was very cerebral in a lot of ways. When my wife and I would go over to visit him, he would give us these like mystery quizzes. Involved words, phrases, and questions. And for example, he would say, Sue and I, what makes you feel complete? And we'd like, think about it. And then we'd give him an answer. We'd kind of, look at us, maybe he'd smirk. Maybe he gave you that look where that one eyebrow went up. And, he was the kind of guy that would look at you and you felt like he was looking into you at something that you weren't real comfortable with anyway. And you don't know how the hell he saw it, but you thought he did. And anyway, we give him we give him our answers and never got a response from him really, or a grade or a pass fail to this quiz. He just would nod, smile maybe, give it a look. And after a while, knowing Glen, being around him, kind of understanding him, he came to understand that he was also really good at bullshit. My wife and I's relationship with Glen really gelled when it came to plants. We simultaneously got into perennial plants around the same time. And it kind of evolved into this specialized interest in hostas. And Glen being Glen, he kind of jumped in the both feet and we started this incredible collection. And he created this amazing garden around the house on Dewey Street. It really became quite a showpiece. And as Melon mentioned, he had one of the largest hosta collections in the northeast of this country. And as he collected and created his garden, he got heavily involved with the American Hosta Society, which is an institution that embodies everything that has to do with the plant hosta. Hybridizers, scientists, collectors, people that don't have anything else to do, they're bored, they gravitate. They have, these big meetings every year, information, plant material. Well, anyway, didn't take him very long. He became on a first name basis with all the prominent, knowledgeable people in the hosta world. And then he had access to the rarest plants, the newest varieties, and he also started contributing to the American Hosta Society Journal as a cartoonist and a writer. And there's a bunch of his cartoons out on the table out there. And my wife and I couldn't keep up with his epic rise in the hosta community. He did open a lot of doors for us. We met a lot of great people. We learned a lot about the science, hybridizing, the trends in the plant business. The thing about Glen was kind of whatever he got involved in, got involved all the way. And, he, toward the later part of his life, he was not really mobile, but he was able to bring the world to him instead of having to go to bed. And that's kind of what he did in this, in the hosta world. The world came to him. I think the last thing I want to share is so many stories. This is the thing that impressed me most about Glen. After his father died, my grandmother was left alone. And she was elderly. She was recovering from a hip injury in a car accident. And Glen more or less gave up his teaching career. Moved home, took care of her. So she would have, she could live out the rest of her days in dignity and comfort. And I thought this really, truly defined Glen. Very human being. So that's what I have to say. So anybody else want to speak, please do, and even if it's just a word.
Start there.
Okay.
Hello, everybody. Thomas Graham. I'm, was, Glen's next door neighbor, porch to porch. And, I come out in the morning and halfway decent morning, he'd be out there. And he'd say, good morning, Tom, what you doing today, this, that, and the other thing. You mentioned how he liked the laughter of the children and stuff like that. And, one of the things, he would share with me time to time, he told so many people, I'm sure, that he just forgot, he didn't tell me. He would get out, it's a shortcut through there to high school for a lot of the young kids. And so we got sick of it, he'd get out there in the bathroom and hear it. And they thought it was, you know, he was checking their speed, and he thought he was doing radar, and he had a riot. He said, they could slow right down, what you mean? I said, what do you do with the cord? He said, down asleep. He's go on and on, something, you know, silly, so many silly things. The hospital, had like a double edge to that thing. He says, everybody thinks I really like hospitals, and I do, but I really like not having them out. And so I was giving you a hard time. He said, you want to borrow my lawnmower anytime you want. So I think it's still out there somewhere. Other ones, you know, you push, well, and he constantly remind me that he had brain surgery. And now, you know, he says, I do get forgetful sometimes. He knew more than I would. Very, very, beautiful.
So I'm Diane, Jean's daughter, and Glen was my uncle. You know, I totally agree with everything that what Andy said about my uncle. You know, I again just wanted to second what a wonderful son he was to my grandmother. You know, he did really, and I agree with you, you know, he just decided to retire to care for her, and that's just really, to me, that's really never, you know, come to other people. It's just, you know, he was so good to her, and as a brother, you know, I know my dad, you know, follow on of his brother, and they kind of cared for each other, you know, I was fortunate to work him on the last day of life, and so that was a great privilege for me. We greatly missed, but we were remembered certainly in artwork. I'm happy to say that he would be happy to hear that his great niece, my daughter, is also going to art school. You know, so she's going to be she's attending now the main Falls Art Design. So the kind of the artistic kind of stuff is going to continue here. So yeah, I'll be greatly missed.
Well, I started out walking with the dog. And after a while, I ended up buying his groceries, taking him to the doctor, etc. Doing his laundry. He was an incredibly aggravated man. But when we're talking about how he took care of his mother, I think one of the nicest things he did for his mother when she was in the nursing home, and her roommate was the mother of a friend of mine that I went to high school with. And there was this one particular nurse who pissed them off. I don't, Nurse Ratchet. So he got super soakers. Squirt guns. Taught them how to use them. And they had so much fun. Put the bell on, poor helpless old babies, you know. And when she come in, they have the guns under their covers. Bazoom! So when you're in the nursing home, it's good to have a super soaker. If it's so I need and build it. So I'm sure I have lots of stories. I spend a lot of time, as I say, being mad as hell at it. But I seem to be crying. And another story about when he was up there, Jack Burns Center. And I would go up when I could. I don't know how long he was there, but, and when he was in the ICU, I went up. Well, very near the end, he wasn't talking anymore. But he knew I was there, and he had his music on. And he was just uncomfortable. Whatever was going on in his body, it was present to him, and it was not good. And along came this woman who was a massage therapist. And she could only reach right around here, back of his neck to the shoulder. She just started. And I watched his face. And when she left, there was not a line on his face. He was perfectly calm and happy. And that was the greatest gift I was just thrilled. So, and Tom, you meant so much to him. And I have really enjoyed connecting with you. Oh, I'm looking at your picture on the stupid camera. Anyways, a lot to say. He was vast. He was a vast man in every way. So.
We're going to have a centerfold here. And for Karen, I'm going to introduce Karen playing a very special piece, which is special in Glen's life. Music was another aspect of Glen that was really huge. And I got to know Glen because he started volunteering at the recycling center way back in the 90s. And so we got acquainted, and there were groups that got together and met at his house. And I had a very dear friend who I also met at the recycling center, and named Gary, and he taught art up at Castleton, and he and Glen connected, and it was so fun to be a fly on the wall visiting and watch them, because they were both great cultured intellects, and it's wonderful. Gary also had a huge interest in music, and so the three of us would often get in on that zone. And Glen, somewhere along the line, he mentioned to me how much he loved Beethoven's Piano Concerto No. 32. This is his last piano concerto. Now, I grew up playing piano and never became accomplished like Karen, but enough so I could enjoy playing things and even pecking away at the piano concertos. But I had never even gotten close to No. 32. No. 32. So I started listening to it. And when it would come on the radio, rarely, I would call Glen and I said, hey, Glen, if they're doing number 32, turn the radio on. Oh, thanks, Howard. And so I got a little bit acquainted with it. And so it seemed appropriate to do some excerpts from the number 32 for this occasion. Karen found a very interesting poem that has to do what's about the Beethoven Opus 111, which is the number 32. So I'm just going to read a couple of small excerpts from this very, very lengthy poem, which is something by Amy Clanton, because I think you'll be able to feel Glen somewhat in what I read to you too. It starts. This is a little one sentence intro by for Norman Carey by Osip Mandelstam, but it's quite a sentence. There are epochs when mankind, not content with the present, longing for time's deeper layers, like the plowman, thinks and thirsts for the virgin soil of time. Okay, well that's enough to think about right there. But there's two. This is from the poem, and she refers to two the different parts. Well, they're actually of this particular piano sonata in the two excerpts I'm reading, and that is what Karen is going to be playing. Beethoven in his workroom, ear trumpet, conversation book, and pencil, candlestick, broken crockery, the Graf piano wrecked by repeated efforts to hear himself. Out of a humdrum of squalor, the levitations, the shakes and triplets, the adagio, molto semplice e cantabile, the ariete, a disintegrating surf of blossom opening along the keyboard, along the fence rows of astonishment, of sweetness. And the end part. Beethoven, shut up with four walls of his deafness, rehearsing the unhearable, semplice e cantabile, somehow reconstituting the blister shirt of the intolerable into these shakes and triplets, a hurrying into flowering along the fence rows. In its messages, the levitation of serenity, as though the spirit might aspire in its last act to walk on air.
I'm going to play a little bit of this arietta from the Opus 111 Sonata number 32, which I assiduously avoided my entire life. And so when Hallie asked me to come and do this today, it was really a gift. And it's made me think of the saying of Buddha, it is no small thing to be born human. To have this connection with the man that I knew from his garden, we would visit across the fence, but we weren't close friends. But when I found out that he and I had this very esoteric link in Beethoven, I'm just so grateful that I had a chance to live this life as a human being and be able to play the piano. This piece is written in the time signature, for those of you who are musicians, of 9/16, and then it gets weirder from there. So I'm only going to play the first bit of it, but I think if Beethoven is almost at the end of his life, this is the last thing he wrote, totally deaf. He's been deaf for years. He has nothing left to prove. He's hearing things and playing things, but only he can hear. Yet, it was important to him to transcribe this, to put this out so that we can hear it today. And that I think is the amazing thing about being a person, and the amazing thing that I have now found.
Thank you so much, Karen and Allie, for that musical tribute to Glen.
I love the word that you used for him, Andy, vast. That's a great, great word to describe who he was and who he still is in all of our hearts. And music is part of his a huge part of his vastness. So thank you for that. Into his heart and mind. So we just had a little bit of a musical interlude from our storytelling, our sharing of stories and memories of Glen. So we're so glad. Sorry you got caught in traffic here in Carroll, but glad you're here and it's not too late to share. So anyone, including the two of you, who has more stories and memories to share, you're welcome to come forward.
You all want to do it?
We've got a camera there for people who are on Zoom, so there, yeah, anywhere in that area. But we did forget.
Saw Glen during a period of
How to speak up as much as you can.
Okay. So, I don't know how many people saw Glen's talk and powder making period of time, and he gave me one of those, and they called it a good job. So, then we'll bring it out. I think that if you're interested to see it, during that time, he said the popsicle stick and the toothpick are two tools that are used. And the one that I really loved was when he started making them of different parts of his life that he visited, maybe the streets of Cusco, or one was it was a cornfield here, and there was a picture of a woman bending way over to pick up the corn, and what you could see as a detail was the lace on the paper, and I love that one. It's beautiful. So. Anyway, next time I'll bring it down and we can take a look at that. Let's see.
First, I just want to share our feeling of the loss we feel for friends and family members. Glen, good friend of both of us. We are former peaceful volunteers. We both went to training, Carol and I, in March of 1967. Back in the day. I met Glen that first day. Training was in Tucson, Arizona, at the University of Arizona. And with all the men were being kind of, we bunked at the YMCA. And met Glen that first day. And we kind of connected mostly because we're both from New England. I grew up in Lebanon, New Hampshire, with 8 brothers and sisters. And you know, Glen mentioned, you know, we see someone for the first time, oh, where are you from? Springfield, Vermont. Oh, Springfield. I have relatives in Springfield. I have an uncle and aunt, and the 2 sons. The last name is White. I don't even, I've lost track of them. But anyway, that's how that was kind of like the first kind of connection. And Carol also got to know Glen at that time. We were there for 3 months of intensive Spanish language training. And a lot of cross-cultural, governmental, politics, anything that's going to prepare us to go overseas and to be able to adapt to the culture and etc. So, and Glen was a part of that with us, and that's how we kind of got to meet each other,
Do you recall anything from that time at all, or? anything with- Yeah.
I do. And, during that time, of the peaceful groups, when I put them all together, are usually under groups that contain something that person really loves or enjoys doing. And so, our large group was, athletes, and my group, was Glen, who was artistic things and did, under the playground and all that with children and did the other side. So, when we centered in the London Institute, they, it was the Venezuelan,
What?
American,
Oh, it's a cultural institute for the exchange of cultures and.
and they asked me, I was working with 2 or 3 schools and children, doing artwork, play, a number of different things. And so, I knew that Glen was to play and also, drawing with children, etc. So I tried to reach him, of course, back then, he had no phones, not people that didn't have money, didn't have phones at their home either. So it was a matter of trying to reach them some way. And so I was, I finally, talked to Glen and I said, Glen, I would like you to do this project. If you could come and bring some of your artwork of your children and he said, I'd love to. So I haven't done a lot of that. And the latest thing I've done is a book. He said, I've been looking at the language of the children, the Spanish language, we know much of it. So he had, I think that's why it's several books on it, but long. He was using the picture of the word, the child would draw the word, and then they would, learn those parts of that day. So that helped them to learn to speak Spanish. And so I said, well, we'll need to make a date of this, go to this cultural center, and we did that. Before I did that, I asked to have some children come along. And I asked the parents, could you bring 4 children with you? And we can do the puppet theater and we can combine all those different things. And I said, I will take the children with the bus. He said, oh no, don't do that. He said, my sister lives in America. You can stay with her. I will take the 4 children. Thank you. So we arrived on that day and I did. And 4 children, we were that. So I said, we're next to school. I said, I work with the nuns. I know the nuns. I said, I'm not going to do it. And I did. And I didn't believe she did this, but she gave me what she did. And today that would never happen. But 4 children to do the puppet theater and 1 boy to do the reading. And so we had 2 boys and 2 children. And I think they were 5th and 6th grade, I think it was. And it was great. Glen came and he had just done some work with the exhibit. So he had done a lot of hanging and things, and I didn't have a lot of experience with that. And so Glen came right over and showed me different arrangements of and wow, he did a great job of doing that. Very professional. He looked like he would work like he wants to. And so the children never came, but we did put it all together. And got the children home. It was 5 minutes for them. And it all worked out fine. We were there for 5 days. We went through public theater there, so that we visited for 1 and 2. And we had wonderful reviews and made great prize for the both countries, of course. We no longer in Venezuela, and it's very difficult for us to see what Venezuela was. And now It's gone. And of course, I was a little bit disappointed that the children couldn't come, and I tried to think about that. I remember during our training for preschool, they told us that there would be 2 alarms if you make arrangements with someone and they don't show up. And that's exactly what happened. And he said, and you don't say anything about it. Oh. And so it is, we've learned that it is part of the culture. So of you who know about people who come from those countries, I don't go over that subject at all, but I can see that they like to play in and take it don't rush it or anything. So it was hard to learn, but it's something I ended up with.
I'm gonna, we don't take up a lot of time. I'm gonna just mention a couple of things. And then you can, if you want, ask us a question about it, and then we can elaborate. First off, I have there's a picture up here for you to see Glen with a tie on. He had this taken for our, when our group of 70 was invited, to the Tucson to begin training. So everybody had their picture of this little book. So it's a little kind of bio of Glen. So he is wearing a tie. So, Glen, they needed to know that. And then also have so a lot of things. Glen was placed in a place called Romas Bajas. You can almost, the way it sounds is the way it was. Bajas, out there with the Romans, it was all clay, and it was very kind of a place that was outside of a big city in a remote kind of rural area. And here's Glen. Now, they looked at Glen's skills and abilities, potter, artist, and so on. And you probably, if they talked to me, if I said, I didn't see Glen saying that, right? And so that's where we ended up. We met him. We were probably his first and maybe very few visits. We walked up there. We were going on a little trip down to Machu Picchu through Ecuador and Colombia and so on. But we said, we got to stop by and see Glen, say hello. So we walked down and he was like shocked to see that first off that we were there and but that was, he was spending his time and giving his time, giving up his gifts to the people in the very remote area. And imagine how they felt. People just don't spend time. People don't go. Here's Glen, living with it, and then teaching them. They had pottery, very rudimentary, but they needed to get it stronger, they needed certain techniques. It was a good match, for Glen. And I still think of him many times as a passionate potter. And if you know or see any of his work, he's an expert. And every once in a while, I've played a little, you could say, call it a hymn, call it a poem, call it a song in the hands of the potter. And I'll think of Glen doing that. So we have known him in Venezuela as an artist, as a Peace Corps volunteer, as a fellow friend. We've known him back in the States. Touched base with him while he was teaching in Auburn, Mass. As an artist. And most of the time, we just going up to see my relatives, we'd stop by and sit on the blue porch and reminisce. And sometime I'd go home with a hosta. Sometime I'd go home with a cucumber, maybe a sunflower. And so, kind man, for sure. A giver, for sure. But he also had a lot of funny words, and his writings and saying and so on. So we miss him. And but if and when you have any questions, you want to know more, we certainly would like to know how you know Glen. Please feel free to let us know.
didn't come up to this area that much. But, later after that, we did, and, we had our first child, Tim. And, we led to be some capital. And, sister there. So that was very special.
I just asked permission to take another minute. Volunteer friend of Glen's, back in the day, a young lady, now just a lady, and she's from Iowa. Judy and Carol, best friend. Judy was in Carol's wedding.
Another very good photograph. You know, and stuff. That's like Glen, yeah.
I look at Glen and say, the godfather. Judy wrote this to us when she heard, I shared the obituary a while ago, and she wrote this. Please, I promised her I'd read some of it, share it with you. It's about Glen. I often call Glen Glendon, as I was just at the Peace Corps time, moving out of my Japanese faith. When I referred to him while speaking with my family, he was often Glen, the bearded one. Neither of these facts need to be shared with anyone else. I just add them out of fondness for the man. While Spanish was not Glen's forte, he was indeed a master of English and had a special skill for playing with language. His cards and letters often included plays on words. That comes to mind immediately as an example in the notion I found on the back of an envelope that contained a lengthy letter 40 years ago. Always the wordsmith, he chose to attempt to conjugate in Spanish the name of Gobi as the desert. When Glen was working in Massachusetts, we exchanged letters, often about our teaching experience. He had developed an interdisciplinary approach with art, world history, and other subjects. Some years after returning from Peace Corps in Venezuela, Glen and I traveled to Spain to meet other ex-volunteers, who at the time was working at an international school near Valencia. Glen brought a couple of shirts along and no doubt some reading material. But actually, she said most of the bag that he had, the one bag, had a few shirts and the rest was books. What? So, Glen was one of the first people I met during Peace Corps training in Tucson in 1967. I remember walking down the street with him that first day as a group of us set out to search for pizza for supper. He was always kind to me. I can see him still, I can hear his voice. He was truly one of a kind, and we love him. As Judy Logan, an ex-volunteer, friend of ours, very good friend of Glen from Iowa. Thank you for your time. Thank you for listening.
Judy was the person that I was with when we first into campus, and they sent us out to different places. I was alone first, and I did not like that. I'm a female alone at that time, not the best thing to be. And she didn't really have things go very well with her either in a very different location. So Judy and I went to one of the person that was before me, and we got together, and the combination was good, and I really enjoyed having her. A lot of things together. And we had that puppet show. She sewed a lot of the dresses and things to go on. So it was great. And I don't know if I mentioned that he made marionettes, and so he got marionettes, and I never did that. But he helped train some of them, and so we were playing in the afternoon with both puppets and marionettes, and the kids loved it, and they really loved the creativity that it had. Thank you so much. Yay, I'm so glad you came, and we're at the end, we'll have a reception down the hall. That will be a great opportunity for folks to hear more stories, so that's wonderful. And talk, yeah, Yeah, we have more music and more to come. So Tom, I believe you wanted to share something, is that right? Yeah, so Anne Marie, or Bob can unmute you, and maybe someone can put a spotlight on you, and, so we can.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Yeah.
Okay.
Can you-
Well, Andy really gave a perfect verbal portrait of Glen, and one of the nouns was an imp. That he surely was. And by the way, I met him. We were art education majors at Kutztown State College in 1962, and we remained friends up until the time of his passing. He always liked to test people as to their comfort level and at what point they would be embarrassed. I'll start with a very simple thing. 3 of us were going to go to the hospital to visit a friend who was hospitalized. And 2 of us we realized we were walking in front of Glen. Suddenly we hear this dragging of a feet of his foot. Oh, stop, I can't walk that fast. There was nothing wrong with him. That was his way of, doing that. And then a very elaborate thing. He had friends that were going to have this very posh cocktail hour, and their property, I guess the end of the property was on a body of water. So what does he do? He rents a gorilla suit, gets into a canoe, and his idea was he was going to, here's this gorilla paddling down, these people are out with their cocktails, and he's coming, and it was like a formal wear, and he's coming down in his gorilla suit. He hadn't figured out how he was going to get out of the canoe, and this was when he was thinner, believe me. And he hadn't figured out that when he stepped out of the canoe, he was up to, I guess, knees in mud, and he was sort of mired. He didn't know how to get out. The people were there either astonished or amused. And so the one thing is he paid for it because it cost him a fortune to clean that gorilla suit of the mud. Well, yeah, and then Andy also said about he and his wife would get questions. This is my last story. 3 of us would go to New York City. I guess this lasted 7 years at Thanksgiving for maybe about 5 days. And in advance of our going, we would receive in the mail 2-3 pages of single-spaced questions that we were to be prepared to answer him when we got together. That was Glen. I love him dearly. I miss him dearly. Thank you.
That's great. Where are you tuning in from, Tom?
Pardon?
Where are you right now physically?
Oh, I'm I'm actually about 10 minutes away from where we went to undergraduate school. I came back and taught at Kutztown, and now I live in a little burg called Fleetwood, but it's very close to Kutztown, Pennsylvania.
Wonderful. So glad you're here. Great. Is there anyone else who would like to share a story, a memory of Glen, or anyone online? I think, yeah, you could probably. Alan? Yes. Dan, all right.
Well, a lot has been covered already. So I'll just see if I can start a little further in from where I was going to go here. In his weekly column for the local paper,
He shared a great variety of stories about Springfield and the surrounding area, sometimes wandering as far as Gaskets. Apparently, that was a great thing to do when he was a teenager, to drive out to Gaskets and drive back and forth over the bump. He first started writing under the pseudonym A.J. Walker. But after a while, his old high school English teacher called him up and said, "You can't fool me, Mr. A.J. Walker. I can tell you're really Glendon Williams." So he switched and started to write under his own name. It's sort of a Garrison Keeler or William Faulkner of Springfield, Vermont. It was kind of a stretch coming up with new ideas every week for years on end. So sometimes he would call up friends to ask for ideas, some of which were so outrageous that he could actually use them. He was assisted by a good imagination and the conviction that the truth should never stand in the way of a good story. After he retired from writing for the paper, people walking by his porch would be invited to sit a spell and talk about the good old days or philosophy or whatever the neighbors had done yesterday. Because of his brain surgery, he was able to get stories also from his dreams, which sometimes appeared to him as if they had actually happened. This could be confusing or interesting, depending on the dream. When he was working for the paper, he interviewed an old couple who lived out in Cambridgeport, that's out past Gaskets. They wanted their story told, but not until after they were gone. They had been abducted by aliens and had a great experience on another planet before being returned to Earth. They were eagerly awaiting their next trip on a UFO. Glen wanted to go too. I doubt he ever published the whole story in paper. It would have been too long, but perhaps he is out there now, somewhere near Alpha Centauri, talking with the natives about his adventures on Earth.
I'm Ellen Ullman, and I'm a member of the congregation. And as people have said, Glen was very generous with his hostas. I have many in my garden that he brought to a plant sale in the spring, or if you were on his garden tour, he would give plants out to everybody that came to his garden, which was wonderful. And one of my favorite stories that Glen told was that he was out working one day, and as he got older, he would often lay down while he was working, and he fell asleep. And he was sleeping, and you could hear these kids coming down the street. And he said, "Do you think he's?" And they got a stick and poked him. And he related that story a couple times. It just tickled me every time he told it. It's like, imagine just to see this person laying out beside the road with all the weeds piled up around it. Glen wasn't just my uncle, my mother. He was one of my very best friends. It's very sad because we had wonderful times together. But little by little, we lost Glen. It was so sad. We were so close. I can tell you, more than a decade that we had supper every Sunday night. And me and coach Andrew and be provocative, what he was saying, and, challenging us, and then we'd ask him something back. He could look smirky, smile, and then ask me those questions. So, and then love to try provocative questions, see if we can get them going. Yeah, but you know what it's like. He was so supportive. First, Andrew started to paint, and then he bought him some paints, and then I started to paint, and he did all the lessons, and being so supportive. So I brought him my paintings, and he went, "Huh, that wasn't necessary, was it?" And now, he and my husband are rocking forward. They're just absolutely terrified. He was telling me about this great story. His mother and father went down to visit him in the Peace Corps. And his mother was appalled where he was living, and the windows and everything else. So she sent him down some screaming. And so he screamed everything in, that was going to be the end of all the bugs and everything else. Shortly thereafter, he lit a candle or something in the middle of the night. And he blew it. Squirrel, or something. But what he'd done is he tracked all the bugs and all the spiders in with him, and he said, just terrifying, and just, no, the things I said, we said, and I don't think he ever turned it over later on. So, I mean, he was so funny. I mean, he was provocative, he was, I don't know, we would argue religion with a lack of it, one time he'd be an atheist, and the other time he'd be an agnostic. We just had such fun conversations. We so look forward to it. And then after his operation, he started to fade. And, there was less conversation and more like, let's just sit together and watch a movie. And as he started to fade some more, it got to be the point where, he was just, partway through the movie, he'd say, you just stay and finish that movie and I'll go again. And so we lost him little by little. So I've been wanting Glen for a long time. I really miss him. I mean, he was so sweet and he was so terrible. And he was so wonderful. And the kind of last I had with him where, we had a good conversation was when I came out of the hospital. And he figured out his loneliness, so he started calling me up every day. And he'd always get to the point, about this, and he'd go, have to go to the bathroom. That was always the end of our conversation every time. And it was like, it was so nice. But yeah, I mean, I don't think I will ever be anybody like Glen. I don't think I will ever be anybody who's intellectual. And, he was so stimulating. It was just such a pleasure. And has anybody ever going to feel his shoes? And another thing nobody's talked about is the love affair between him and me. Two of them were so close. Glen said, if Andrew was the son he always wished he had. And there was such a bond of love between them. It was wonderful. And, I was sorry I wasn't going to see that fade in you. We will always miss him.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else? We can continue sharing stories in the activity room, artwork to enjoy with artwork. We're gonna sing and then ask you to join us. Now and I are going to sing "Let the Life I've Lived." And you should have the words there. And Karen's going to play for us to begin. So now and I'll sing it once, hear it, and then join in.
So since we're invoking Glen as we sing this, I'm going to just put on a little of Glen's attire that he passed on to me. I love his colors. And I recognize this. Okay, so we'll sing one verse and then hopefully you will join us as much as you want to.
Sweet
entry point. Oh, that is the perfect tribute. His life will speak on and on and on, and all of our hearts. And many, a long time to come. So I'm going to do a recitation of something called the Litany of Remembrance, and there's a line, and your response is, "We remember him." So I'll give a gesture to you, but it's time for your line. In the rising of the sun and its going down, we remember him. In the blowing of the wind and in the chill of winter, we remember. In the opening of the buds and the rebirth of spring, we remember. In the blueness of the sky and in the warmth of summer, we remember. In the beginning of the year and when it ends, we remember. When we are weary and in need of strength, we remember. When we are lost and sick at heart, we remember. When we have joys we yearn to share, we remember. So long as we all live, he too shall live. For he is a part of us now as we remember. So let us bring our time, start to bring this to a closing. In honor, we'll sing together 159 in your hymnal. I chose this one in honor of this time the Peace Corps, his travels around the world, his vastness. What better song to honor Glen with than "This Is My Song"? The tune is Finlandia. So stand. Yeah, you can stand and bow your spirit as you choose. What better vessel for Glen's remains than one of the items that he created? This. So let's just do a blessing. Dear Glen, we are so fortunate that our lives and your life have crossed. You have touched each of us in a permeable way. You have stirred in us a longing to live in our own way in the vastness that you modeled. There is only one you, there will always only be one Glen. And you live so big and so fun and with such art and determination, you stir in each of our hearts to desire to live even somewhat as fully as you did. Whatever is in the great mystery, who knows? Maybe you are up there with the UFO, we don't know. You go before us, and you go with our love and our blessing. As we just sang, what better tribute than a life well lived? Go in peace. May your spirit be free of a body that was no longer working, as of a mind that was no longer as lucid, of a heart that was no longer as vast. You are free now, Glen. Free to live into the mystery. Know that you rest always in our love and in our memories. We are grateful that we knew. And to all of us gathered here, may each of us take from this gathering sweet memories, new stories, new reasons to chuckle about who Glen was, and new aspirations for how we can live our own lives, knowing that our brief shared paths and our joy in knowing Glen doubles and triples into vastness. May it be so, blessed be. Anne Marie, did you want to say something?
I wanted to read to you what Terry, who was on here, she left a message.
Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Terry left a message before she left saying thank you. Let me just get it here. To everyone who shared their memories of Glen today, it brought back many warm recollections, and I learned a lot I did not know. Terry.
Sweet. Thank you so much, Anne Marie, from the chat box. Thank you so much. So you're
Thank
welcome. Join us for a wonderful reception and enjoy his artwork. Thank you. Thank you, Anne Marie. Thank you, Bob. Take care.